They thought she'd never speak again. She hadn't said a word in 132 days, not even to her own mother. But when an old rescue dog walked onto the stage and gently placed his paw on her wheelchair, the room froze. Then she whispered a single name, and everything changed. They say heroes come in many forms. Some wear badges, others wear scars. And then there are those who say nothing at all, who simply show up quietly, faithfully, again and again. That morning, the marble atrium of the National Rescue Academy was hushed, holding the breath of those who had come to remember. Rows of folded chairs faced a stage draped in navy and silver, beneath a banner that read, "In service, in sacrifice." Families sat shoulder to shoulder, but the spaces between them felt wide. The kind of space grief carves out and never quite gives back. There were children too young to understand why their parent would run into danger, and parents too old to make peace with the fact that they never came back out. Some wore medals pinned over black suits. Some held hands so tightly their knuckles turned white. And in the third row from the back, beside a quiet man in a gray uniform, lay a dog, Fenrir. He wasn't wearing anything that marked him as special. No service vest, no ID tag. Just a plain collar, a strong build, and eyes that had seen too much. A Belgian Malinois, once part of the elite wildfire search and rescue unit, Fenrir had been trained to run towards smoke while others fled from it. He had pulled children from collapsed cabins, located lost hikers with only a footprint and a heartbeat, and yet here he was now, older, slower, forgotten by most, resting at the feet of strangers, as though he were just another service animal in retirement. But anyone who knew the stories knew better. Fenrir had been more than a dog. He was Dean Blake's partner. Dean, the man whose name was carved into the memorial wall that morning. The man who had given his life during the Cedar Hollow blaze, using his final moments to shield a child from falling debris. That child was his own daughter. Fenrir hadn't been seen publicly since that day. After Dean's death, he was quietly removed from duty, his fate uncertain. Some assumed he'd been placed with another handler. Others believed he couldn't work anymore, not because his body failed, but because his heart was too full of ghosts. And yet, as the announcer called families forward, as names were read aloud and flags were folded with ritual precision, Fenrir simply watched. His ears twitched at the sound of bagpipes in the distance. His eyes didn't leave the stage. Something in him knew this wasn't just another ceremony. This was a goodbye. Or maybe a beginning. Avery Blake used to sing in the car, every morning like clockwork. She'd press her face against the window and belt out whatever tune was stuck in her head, usually off-key and too loud, but with a joy so pure it made stoplights feel like stages. Her father, Dean, would drum the steering wheel like a goofball, playing along, while her mother, Helen, rolled her eyes and smiled from the passenger seat. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. That music ended on a burning road. The fire had come faster than expected, fanned by a sudden change in wind direction. Dean had been helping evacuate homes along the ridge, but when Avery's school bus was rerouted and chaos broke out, he made one decision: get to his daughter. They barely made it out of the evacuation zone, and when the rear axle of their vehicle snapped while skidding through ash, Dean did what any father would do. He wrapped himself around his little girl and took the full weight of the crash. The doctors called it a miracle that Avery survived. But Helen never liked that word, because miracles don't come at such a price. Avery's spine had been damaged. Her legs didn't respond. But worse than that, she hadn't spoken a single word since. Not to nurses, not to her therapist, not even to Helen. The silence wasn't medical, was grief-shaped, heavy, unrelenting, the kind that lives in the eyes and steals the light. Helen tried everything. She read bedtime stories out loud with a smile she had to tape together each night. She filled therapy journals, cooked Avery's favorite meals, even if they went untouched. But the house stayed quiet, like someone had unplugged the sun. So when the invitation to the memorial arrived, Helen didn't ask Avery if she wanted to go. She just told her gently, "It's what your father would have wanted." She didn't expect anything to change. She didn't expect her daughter to feel anything. But deep inside the child who no longer sang, a single ember still glowed. Waiting. They saved Dean Blake's name for last. Maybe it was tradition. Maybe it was respect. Or maybe, just maybe, someone in that room knew the final tribute would carry a weight unlike the others. As the speaker's voice echoed through the auditorium, "For unmatched bravery in the Cedar Hollow fire, we honor Lieutenant Dean Blake." Every seat fell into deeper stillness. Some heads bowed, others stared forward, refusing to blink. Helen rose from her seat, her face steady, even as her hand trembled on the back of Avery's wheelchair. Avery didn't move. Not when the applause broke out. Not when her mother leaned down and whispered, "We're going up, sweetie." Her small hands rested motionless in her lap, her eyes unfocused. The same quiet she had wrapped around herself for the last 132 days cloaked her even now. As they reached the steps, the audience hushed again. Helen accepted the medal on Dean's behalf. Her fingers closed around the velvet box like it was something fragile, already cracked. She turned Avery's chair gently toward the crowd, not expecting a reaction, only surviving the moment. Then it happened. From the back of the room, Fenrir stood. There was no command, no handler tugging his leash, just a slow, deliberate movement, a dog no longer young, but not forgotten. He stepped forward, each pawfall silent yet thunderous. Rows of people turned their heads, a few gasped, but no one stopped him. He climbed the stairs as if they were familiar, as if he'd been here before, in some other life beside Dean. Then at the center of the stage he paused. He looked at Avery, not past her, not through her, but into her, and with solemn grace he lifted his front paw and placed it gently on the metal armrest of her wheelchair. Avery blinked. For the first time in months, something behind her eyes stirred. Her lips parted, her chin quivered, and then like a match struck in the dark she whispered, "Fenrir." Her first words since the fire, her first step back. No one asked questions, no one needed to. After the ceremony, as people filtered out of the hall, still stunned by what they'd witnessed, Fenrir simply followed Helen and Avery to their car. There was no handler running after him, no leash, no hesitation. It was as if everyone understood something had just shifted, quietly, permanently. A final mission had been passed down, not through orders or protocol, but through a single whispered name: Fenrir. He climbed into the back seat without a sound, settling beside Avery's chair like he'd always belonged there. Helen glanced at him in the rearview mirror, unsure what to say. She didn't need to. He wasn't looking for permission. He was already home. That night, Avery didn't speak again, but she didn't cry either. Helen found her in bed, curled slightly to the side, one hand resting on the thick fur of Fenrir's neck. His body lay long across the foot of her bed, head on his paws, eyes half closed but alert, as if guarding something precious. When Avery stirred in her sleep twisted from a nightmare, Fenrir lifted his head and nuzzled her wrist. When she whimpered, he leaned in closer. He didn't bark, didn't whine, just stayed, anchored, constant. In the days that followed, they moved together like shadows. Avery didn't wheel herself far, just from her room to the window, sometimes out to the porch, but Fenrir followed every inch. If she dropped something, he nudged it closer. If she stared into the distance too long, he sat beside her, his silence saying, "You're not alone." Helen watched it unfold slowly, afraid to break it by naming it. The connection between them wasn't loud or dramatic. It wasn't full of big breakthroughs or joyful tears. It was quieter than that, truer than that. Every time Helen checked on her daughter, she saw a hand resting in fur, a pair of eyes meeting eyes, a bond being rewoven, thread by silent thread. Fenrir didn't ask her to talk. He didn't expect her to heal. He simply stayed. It took 3 weeks before Avery agreed to leave the house. Not for school, not for therapy. Just a simple walk in the park, a quiet stretch of green near the woods where she used to feed birds with her dad. Helen had suggested it gently, like offering a memory wrapped in sunlight. Avery didn't speak, but she nodded once. That was enough. They went in the late afternoon, when the light slanted low and golden, warming the tops of trees. Helen pushed the wheelchair slowly along the path, Fenrir walking beside them, his steps measured, his gaze scanning everything. He had a certain way of moving now, less soldier, more sentinel, but still unmistakably alert. Avery held a small bag of seed crackers in her lap. Every few feet she dropped a piece near a bush, watching squirrels dart out, twitchy and curious. For the first time since the accident, Helen saw a tiny lift at the corners of her daughter's mouth. Not a smile exactly, but close. A signal, a stirring. Then the world changed. In less than 2 seconds, a crashing sound tore through the tree line. A deer, wide-eyed and panting, burst from the woods, its hooves slicing the air in frantic, desperate rhythm. Behind it came a low growl. Then a second shape, a large hunting dog, brown-coated, powerful, and completely unleashed, shot out after it, teeth bared and ears flat. The deer veered hard to the right, disappearing into the brush. But the dog didn't follow. It saw Avery. She froze. Her fingers clutched the bag of crackers, now shaking in her lap. The dog's snarl deepened as it locked eyes with her, confused, reactive, territorial. Its pace slowed, but the intent was clear. Fenrir moved before anyone else could. He leapt with such force that his body collided against the side of Avery's chair, pushing it a full 2 feet backward. His frame landed between her and the oncoming dog, hackles raised, stance wide, teeth exposed in a growl that sounded like gravel splitting. The strange dog lunged. Fenrir met it head-on. For a few terrifying seconds, the two animals clashed, fur flashing, paws skidding, jaws snapping. Helen rushed to Avery, pulling her chair back farther, shielding her daughter with her arms. But Avery didn't scream. She didn't cry. She watched, eyes locked on Fenrir. When the attacking dog finally backed off, yelping and retreating into the trees, Fenrir didn't chase. He stood firm, chest heaving, a shallow scratch marking his front leg. Blood dotted his fur. But he didn't seem to notice. He turned, limped back to Avery, and lowered his head to her knee. She stared down at him, wide-eyed, lips trembling, not from fear, but something else, something deeper. Then, with a breath that sounded like it came from the center of her soul, Avery cried out, "Fenrir!" It wasn't a whisper this time. It was strong, urgent, full of love. And for the first time, it was hers. The next morning, the house felt different. It wasn't louder. Avery still moved through her day with the same quiet rhythm, but something in the air had shifted. Helen noticed it when she passed by Avery's room and caught the soft sound of a voice. Not hers, not the television, just a gentle murmur. She peeked in. Avery was sitting cross-legged on the rug beside Fenrir, her wheelchair just a few feet away. One hand rested on his shoulder, the other waved slightly as she spoke in half-whispers. "I think the squirrels at the park like the crackers," she said softly. "You were really brave yesterday." Fenrir didn't move, just listened, just like always. Helen didn't say anything. She backed away slowly, hand over her mouth, heart full of something too tender to name. From that day on, the words didn't pour out, but they began to bloom like small wildflowers breaking through hardened earth. At first, only to Fenrir. She'd talk to him about everything. The way the wind made the trees dance, the dreams she had at night, the color she wanted to paint her room. Sometimes just simple things. "Do you like this blanket? Or you snore, you know?" Fenrir never answered, but that didn't matter. He heard her, and somehow that was enough. A few days later, Helen was tucking Avery into bed when she heard the voice again, clearer now, steady. "I miss Dad," Avery said, eyes on the ceiling. "But I'm not scared anymore, because part of him is still here." Helen blinked through sudden tears. She knelt beside the bed, resting her hand over her daughter's. "That part," Avery added, "has fur." The therapist called it progress. They used words like breakthrough, natural trauma recovery, and emotional re-engagement. But Avery just smiled, stroked Fenrir's head, and said, "It's Fenrir magic." Fenrir didn't need commands anymore. He didn't wait for signals or respond to whistles. Instead, he watched. Closely, quietly. Like someone who had seen too much to ever look away again. In the months following the park incident, Avery's voice continued to return, softly, cautiously. But even as words filled the space again, Fenrir remained her constant translation. He could sense when her shoulders tightened, when her breathing shifted, when her eyes grew distant. He'd place his head gently on her lap, anchoring her to the now. Not as a distraction, but as presence. The kind that doesn't ask you to move on, just to stay upright until the storm passes. To outsiders, he was a well-trained service dog. To Avery, he was something else entirely. He was her father's final promise made flesh, the last living link to a man who had always known how to hold her without smothering the pain. And now, somehow, Fenrir did the same, with no arms, no words, just weight and breath and being. Sometimes Avery would look at him for a long time, saying nothing, just letting herself be seen. And in those moments it was clear. Fenrir didn't just understand her grief, he carried it. He had lived inside the fire. And now he made sure she didn't have to walk through the ashes alone. The day Avery returned to school, The halls fell quiet, not from fear, but reverence. It wasn't that she made an entrance. In fact, she barely spoke when she rolled through the double doors, Fenrir walking faithfully beside her, tail low and calm. She didn't wave or look for attention, but something about the way she moved, with quiet certainty, a new light in her eyes, made every head turn. The administration had made a special exception. Fenrir was allowed to stay with her throughout the day, not as a pet, but as an extension of her strength. He curled beneath her desk during class, occasionally lifting his head when she shifted. At lunch, he sat beside her while other kids slowly made their way over, not out of curiosity, but drawn to something they didn't quite understand. Avery didn't talk about the accident, not at first, but when it came time to share in class, she raised her hand. "I used to be afraid of fire," she said, voice steady, "and then I wasn't afraid of it anymore, because I survived it, and because I wasn't alone." Her classmates listened in a silence that wasn't awkward, but respectful. One boy asked if she missed her dad. She nodded. "Every day," she said, "but I don't feel lost anymore, because part of him stayed." She pointed to Fenrir, who blinked slowly, as if acknowledging the truth. In art class, she began painting again, bright, swirling colors, images of trees with golden leaves and skies full of stars. When asked what they meant, she shrugged. "It's what my insides feel like now." People no longer saw the girl in the wheelchair. They saw Avery Blake, the one who came back, the one who survived the fire, the one who didn't run but rose. And beside her, always, walked the proof that sometimes healing doesn't arrive with trumpets or tears. Sometimes it walks in quietly, on four legs, and reminds you, you're still here. And your stilltorium was packed. Families, doctors, therapists, school counselors, and children from all across the state had come to the National Youth Recovery Summit, a celebration of resilience, a tribute to healing. The air buzzed with soft conversations, the quiet shuffle of papers, the occasional cough. But when Avery Blake's name was called, a different kind of stillness fell over the room. She rolled herself onto the stage, hands steady on the wheels, posture straight. Her dark blue dress shimmered slightly under the lights, and at her side, just as he had always been, walked Fenrir. He moved slower now, his steps more deliberate. The gray in his muzzle had spread, softening his features. But his eyes were unchanged, sharp, present, unshakable. Avery reached the podium and paused. She looked out over the crowd, not afraid, not unsure, just taking it all in. Fenrir lay down beside her, front paws crossed, head resting gently over them, eyes still locked on her. Then she began to speak. "My name is Avery Blake," she said, voice quiet but unwavering. "When I was 8, my world caught fire. I lost my dad, I lost my legs, and I lost my voice." The room didn't move. "I didn't think I'd ever come back from that. For a long time, I didn't want to. I thought being quiet made the pain smaller. I thought disappearing was the same as healing." She paused, her hands trembling just slightly on the edges of the podium. But then, Fenrir showed up. A small smile pulled at the corner of her mouth. Below, Fenrir lifted his head slightly at the sound of his name. He didn't say anything. He didn't try to fix me. He just stayed. And somehow in his silence, I found space for my own voice again. Avery glanced down at him, his ears perked gently. Her gaze softened. "My dad taught me how to run," she said, "but Fenrir taught me how to stay standing." There was a beat, a breath, a collective leaning forward. Healing isn't about going back to who you were. It's about learning how to live forward, with your scars, not in spite of them, and learning that even the parts of you that feel broken can still carry light. As she finished, she reached down and placed her hand gently on Fenrir's head. "He's not just a dog," she added, her voice cracking just slightly. "He's my beginning." The applause didn't come all at once. It started in the back, quiet, respectful, and swelled like a rising tide. Not loud, not wild, but full of something sacred. And through it all, Fenrir didn't move. He simply watched her, the same way he had the first time she spoke his name. Some wounds don't bleed. They ache in silence. They live in locked rooms behind tired eyes, in dreams that wake you before dawn, in memories that arrive uninvited and stay too long. And for those wounds, no prescription exists. No textbook knows their language. No voice can reach them the way presence can. Not the kind of presence that fixes or fills the silence with noise, but the kind that simply stays. The kind that says, "I'm here. I see you. I'm not going anywhere." That's what Fenrir was. He didn't speak. He didn't promise it would get better. But his loyalty was louder than fear. His stillness calmed storms. He bore the weight of grief not by removing it, but by making sure Avery didn't carry it alone. And maybe, if you're reading this, you've had a Fenrir in your life. Someone who sat with you in the dark without asking you to turn on the light. Someone who didn't try to fix you because they knew you weren't broken, just wounded. And you healed, not because they gave you answers, but because they never walked away from your questions. Or maybe you're meant to be that presence for someone else. A friend, a stranger, a child holding grief too big for their hands, a soul who just needs someone to stay through the silence. In a world rushing to speak, fix, prove, maybe the bravest thing we can do is be still with someone in their pain. Maybe you are someone's Fenrir. And that is more powerful than any medicine ever will be.